So welcome, and if you can drop a message into the chat, if you can find how to do that. I'm just typing in just now. If you have chance and you'd like to, just pop, pop your name and organisation into the chat to say who we're, so we have a feel for who's all with us today. If you're having any problems with, yeah, that's great to see. Paul, Brock, Ruth, Melanie, Connor, Lee, Paul. Yeah, Paul, I liked that message from you before.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everybody. This is Sue Robinson.
Yeah, I've got Sue Robinson and Pam Shaw with us for actually running. They'll be doing the delivery of the presentation. It's fantastic to have them. So yourselves are, everybody on the webinar is muted, but there'll be the opportunity to connect through the chat function, and you can put comments into the chat if you're having any problems with the sound, and my colleague James, the technical expert, will support you with that. And if you've got questions that you would like to ask in relation to the actual presentation that Sue and Pam are going to take us all through today, then pop them into the chat and we'll pick up on those at the end of the presentation. I hope that all makes sense. So it's great that, thanks ever so much for being able to connect with us today. And I totally appreciate, these are really incredibly challenging times, for all of us. We've received some amazing messages in the last few days about how you're managing to adapt and support, people that you work with, and obviously your own staff and volunteer teams. So it's great to see that, and great to have you all here. So I think without further ado, if people are happy, I will now pass over to Sue Robinson, who's going to take us through the first part of the presentation.
Good morning and welcome. I hope you all hear me. We're going to look through now. I know that you're already all quite experienced trust fundraisers. Some of this might seem deadly dull. I would urge you to remember, and this is the time where we've got to look at what we're doing across all of our activity and not be blasé that we know it all already. So for some of you that came to the session in November, this is a bit of a reminder for you. For those that didn't, this is your opportunity to look at what's happening, what was happening a couple of weeks ago in the Trust and Foundations world, and we can give you a few tips on what's happening right now. And just to announce, I don't know if you've seen it, but the Third Sector Resilience Fund launched this morning, which Cora Foundation are a partner. So if you go onto the SCVO Third Sector Resilience website, a huge funding section, and the major funders in Scotland, Cora and the Scottish Funders Forum, are keeping up to date there with all of the opportunities and how they're managing funds. So make sure you're looking at that website certainly every day, if not every couple of days. But this main session is going to look at background, the regulations, the law, no matter what's happening in our lives, the law and best practice still requires to be complied with. We'll look at what's happening now, what we think is going to be happening in the future, and those hints and tips on what makes a better application, and then why things go wrong, why applications fail. Of course, just to remind you, this is our very best knowledge and information at the moment. It complies with best practice. It's not a substitute for something that your auditor or your lawyer might tell you to do. All right, so that's just the basis for this information. Let's also remind ourselves of where the buck stops in all of this. Although you experience fundraisers, your trustees think you're fabulous, the buck stops with them. They are legally responsible for managing the income for the organisation and making sure that the organisation is secure, income is coming in, and they're managing that. If you haven't already, make sure that your trustees have looked at the explicit fundraising guidance on Ofwat's website. The fundraising guidance for charity trustees, download it, print it off unless you have to. It's kind of half a tree, but it's really well written. And also the Institute of Fundraising has got its own guidance for trustees. Again, more things that they could be doing now while they're at home with a bit less to do than usual.
Sorry, Sue, can I just say that we're going to be doing a whole bit on the webinar, the next one, about trustees and what trustees are going to be, how to get your trustees on board. So we'll talk in an awful lot more detail about that next week or on Friday.
Brilliant, thanks Pam. So the regulation as it still stands in Scotland, we've got two very different fundraising regulation mechanisms. For the fundraising regulator, you've seen their logo everywhere. They're responsible for upholding standards and setting standards across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Whereas here in Scotland, we have the Scottish Fundraising Standards Panel, an independent panel who deal with any fundraising complaints. But these are only fundraising complaints that have been through a three-stage process. At the moment, just to keep you up to date, they are wrestling with two fairly serious complaints in Scotland. England and Wales, Northern Ireland, they've seen a whole swathe of complaints recently, and you've seen the ruling. So if you haven't kept up to date with what the fundraising regulator is doing, do have a look on their website. The Code of Fundraising Practice applies across the whole of the UK and sets the standard. Again, don't print it off, it's almost two trees. But do have a look at what it says about trusts and foundations. There is a small section which refers to trusts and foundations, so make sure you're looking at that area. Now, let's just remind ourselves what they are, and that we need to stop treating them all the same because they're very, very different. So the ones that have been set up by individuals or families who are still alive, they want to know the difference that they're making, they want to be kept up to date, they want to be informed and engaged. Companies, possibly as we move forward with the coronavirus, companies' income is decreasing. It might be that some of those foundations have less money to give away. Some of them are based on the profit share of the company. Others are a mix of sort of staff fundraising and match money from companies. So that could be a little bit trickier moving forward. Or we've got the very solid traditional groups like the Trades House in Glasgow, Rotary Clubs, and other charities that are also grant makers. So SCIAF, for example, raises significant funds in Scotland, but only gives grants to projects overseas. They don't actually deliver projects themselves. So do think about applying to other charities funding. So Save the Children, WWF also make grants, have a look at their criteria. Now, just going back, I know you've seen this slide before, it's probably the oldest act in the world. It isn't saying that it's absolutely the best thing, but this is an example of where the best use of your time. So for most organisations, investing staff time in researching and submitting applications to grant making trusts and foundations is very, very cost effective. In terms of the return that you're getting, the amount of time, effort and energy you're putting in, trusts and foundations are best for most organisations. What we saw in the last recession is that while other forms of fundraising activity plummeted, special events held up. Now, obviously, that's not going to apply in this coronavirus environment. It'll be interesting to see whether trusts and foundations become anchors of most of the funding coming into the sector moving forward. Of course, the income stream that's off the screen is legacies, and that could be very, very a significant form of income for lots of different organisations. And remember, everybody should be talking about legacies on their website. Your trustees might be against it, but try to encourage them and talk about expected rise in legacy income. The Legacy Foresight published some research recently predicting that legacy income was going to increase over the next 10 years. So have a look at that. Just be an extra stream coming in alongside your trust and foundation giving. Remember, we're talking about trusts and foundations here, but historically, the most significant source of income to the whole sector has been individual giving. And it will be interesting to see if that holds up during this economic challenging times that we're facing. But remember, trusts and foundations aren't the biggest. The largest single source of income is individuals, and then things like businesses, the lottery and others. So don't forget your individuals during this time. It might be that they'd really love to have a call from you or receive a letter. Now, as ever in trust fundraising, we're in a very moving world. Law is probably going to change. There was a move afoot for an update of the Charities and Benevolent, the Charities and Trustee Investment Scotland Act. It's been put on hold through Scottish Government, but the likelihood is there'll be changes to that main regulation in 2021. Risk, I mean, who foresaw a global virus in their risk register? I think this is time for everybody to go back and look at their risk register. But in terms of trusts and foundations, you know, some of them might be in a risky situation moving forward. Organisations relying on public fundraising, economic relief, or like BBC Children in Need may find their income decreasing, therefore have less to give away. Ethics is becoming much, much more important. It's about you working with funders that fit with the vision and the values of your organisation and can't be seen to be in conflict with what's your charitable purpose. So looking at where they get their money, you know, is it time to be sitting back and asking questions? You know, is it right if we're working with people from a marginalised community, we're receiving money from the lottery? Is it right that we're receiving income from some of the funders that make most of their money or all of their money through alcohol sales? This could be the time to look carefully at what you're doing, or it might be the time to say we need money from wherever we can get it from. As ever, going back to that first slide, the decision should rest with your trustees, and this might be time. Is this time for them to follow General Booth's alleged comment? I'll take all the money I can get, and I shall wash it clean with the grateful tears of widows and orphans. Is this time for your trustees to say we'll take any money from anywhere? Or is it time for them to say no, we have our values, we have our vision, and we will hold with that? So interesting times. Let's look at the trends that are happening, challenges and the changes that were already happening. Now, this obviously was produced in November prior to the coronavirus epidemic. Even then, there was more competition. Was some changes in the way that funding is happening. So what we're seeing is funds being set up by philanthropists, by individuals who are making a lot of money, being required or being expected to put money away, but they want to be very, very actively involved with that. We've got funders getting much more interested in how your organisation actually works. Is your governance up to date? You submitted all your documents to Oscar on time. So for you as fundraisers, you've got to make sure that higher up in your organisation or yourselves, online, you know, the first thing most funders do will be check the Oscar website if you're a registered charity and look at what's happening on social media, what's being said about your cause. So it's all very well you having spent these weeks, hours, putting together fabulous application. If it doesn't reflect what's being said in social media or on the internet, you're going to be in trouble. So make sure all of your media channels are all focusing on the same thing. This is the time for collaboration and partnership. Can you work together in making an application for particular projects? Can you work together in delivering projects and services much better across different organisations coming together to work together? For interesting times, and the ones that thrive will be the ones that react and change to meet new requirements. Let's look again. So we've got the voluntary sector in Scotland. We're getting £300 million from trusts. Now, I don't know where that's going, but there's a lot of it coming from trusts. But of that, 80 million from Scotland-based trusts. But looking at Scotland-wide, we have lower proportion of our income coming from charitable trusts than the UK, 8% rather than 10%. But for us in Scotland, it's the biggest trust, it's the top 250 trusts that are responsible for 80% of the income. So you really, really need to get to know those top trusts very well. You should try and get yourself on first name terms with all of their assessment teams, grant officers and senior staff. It doesn't usually work by nobbling the trustees, but it might be worth having a go, up to you. But remember, only 10% of trusts grant over £10,000. So this is about you managing your trustees' expectations. Just because you're putting in 10 applications doesn't mean that you're going to immediately raise millions of pounds. Most trusts give small grants or relatively small grants. What else is happening? Remember that there's a huge proportion of trusts set up by individuals, and they do want to keep hold of what's happening and how their money is being given away. Allegedly, one of the larger funders in Scotland gets his family together around the lunch table to discuss applications and who should get the money. So these are families where they're very actively involved. You need to take time to get to them. We think there are about 1,000 in Scotland. I'm not suggesting that you get on first name terms with 1,000, but it's a relatively small amount of organisations. But of those, the top 250 get the most money. Now, let's have a look at the response rate or your chances of success. So this was obviously prior to coronavirus. Robertson Trust, the most likely to be successful, but their requirements are very, very specific about applications, and they will only give funding to registered charities and will only give match funding. So although you could be successful in getting funding from the trust, you might spend months, maybe even a year, trying to get the match funding. Now, at the moment they're reviewing their strategy. It will be interesting to see whether in the new strategy they're going to say we're going to move away from match funding and we'll look at funding 100%. The Foundation again runs a partnership growth initiative, and also Henry Duncan Grant has just reopened. So this is your chance for local groups, local projects to get up to £8,000 to support their activities. And the larger London Trust National Lotteries again was considering closing and reviewing its strategy over the summer. My understanding is that that's now all on hold and they're reviewing what they're going to do. So they're keeping their existing funding streams open at the moment. And Esme Fairbairn and Trust, lower response rates, but the likelihood is that you would get larger grants from them. Right, so now I'm going to take a few minutes. I'll hand over to Malcolm and then you'll pass you over to my colleague Pam Shaw.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? It's Malcolm here. Thanks ever so much for that, Sue. Sorry, I've had a few messages saying that people are struggling with the sound. Can you hear me okay at the moment?
I can hear you, Malcolm.
Okay, so Well, that's great. Hopefully hopefully the sound will stay better from now on. I'll keep my fingers crossed and keep touching the wood on my table here. Pam, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thanks, Malcolm. Yeah.
So do you just want to, before going into the presentation, yeah?
Yeah.
Do you just want to speak, just speak for 20, 30 seconds or something, just to see if the sound is good, yeah?
Okay, right. So hello, everybody. My name is Pam Shaw, and I'm going to be presenting the second half of this webinar for you. Great.
Okay,
Can you all...
okay. I can see that there's quite a few responses. People coming in say very clear. I can hear you fine. So that's great stuff.
Good.
So Pam, I'll hand over to you just to say again for everybody, if there's any questions that you've got in your head from what Sue shared just now, or with what on the slides that Pam is going to go through, then do pop them into the chat and we'll pick them up at the end of the webinar. Over to you, Pam.
Thank you, Malcolm. Right. Hello, everybody. I think what Sue and I, when we talked about this webinar, one of the things we thought was it might be a good idea to go back to the beginning and talk about things like the application process and what makes a good application, along with talking about some things like sustainability. And in today's environment, sustainability is going to be really important. So if you're a community fundraiser, how can you do community events? So we're going to talk a little bit about sustainability at the end. But what we thought would be a good idea is to start with the application process. Now, I know that you've all probably gone through it. But what we thought we'd do is just have a little bit of review. So funders usually follow a pretty clear application process. So you, as someone who's looking for funds, apply, and then there's some sort of assessment. So you see on the screen that there is the apply, assess, award section. So we're just going to run through each of those little processes and talk a little bit about them. So when you apply, if you get a meeting, that's probably a great beginning for you. If they come and see you, or they can either come and see you and do an assessment that way, or they can speak to you on the phone. And different funders do different ways of assessing. If they come out to see you, it's not that you have to, it's not like the Queen coming to visit you, where you have to put everything in operation. What they really want to know is what your organisation is all about. And they want to see your day-to-day life of your organisation. If they like you, they will give you an award, which is fantastic. Hooray, congratulations. They make a decision about what the award's going to be, and then they will then send you and agree through some conditions. And it's really important at this stage to make sure that you agree the conditions so that you understand what's going to be part of the process going on. It might be a really robust process, so it might be that you have to fill in quarterly or annual reports, but you need to make sure what that process is. And then you need to do monitoring. What's really important on this process is that you make sure that you know what the monitoring is going to be before you start. So if you're going to judge how many people come to an event or how many people are, you need to be able to have those monitoring systems in place. And then you're going to be able to evaluate them and report back. And there's lots of really great places out there that can help you evaluate. Evaluate Support Scotland will help you do some evaluation and give you evaluation tools. And so they will help you go through that. Sue, was there anybody else that you can think on the evaluation stage, or anything else that we needed to advise people of doing on evaluations?
No, I always think about the lasting difference toolkit, which is if organisations find the Evaluation Support Scotland stuff difficult, sometimes the lasting difference toolkit can help.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. And I think really that's an important thing, is because of when you're evaluating, the stuff that you're actually collecting, or the information that you're actually collecting, will be really valuable to give to other funders. So if you know, for example, that you've boosted self-confidence, demonstrate how you can do that, you can do that in the next funding application. So you've done your evaluation, and you either have to have an exit strategy, and you should have this all the time, which means that you're going to be getting funding from somewhere else, or you're going to reapply. So this process just goes on in a circle around like that. So I presume that you've all done that before, but it's really important to just remember that when you're looking at applications.
Sorry, just one thing on the valuation. Sorry, Pam. I was just thinking, one of the things the larger funders are saying is that they are happy to accept valuation reports that you're providing for other funders. So, for example, if you've only got 50%, if you've got 50% of your funding from one funder, 50% from the other, one evaluation report is fine. Don't write two separate reports for two separate funders. Talk to them, say you're doing one, send it over. Tend not to mention that when they send you the request for evaluation, but talk to your funders. Please don't be frightened of them.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, and of course, it goes without saying, and we're going to be talking about this in the next webinar that we do, is about building that relationship with funders. So talking to funders about that and about your evaluation. And when you evaluate, you don't need to tell just the good things that happened. You need to talk about those things that didn't go as well as you'd expected. So maybe if something happens and your outcomes weren't successful, funders really want to know about that as well. But I think we'll talk a little bit more of that and about the next webinar. So hopefully you can join us for that one. Sue, if we could go on to the next one, which is just really talking about top foundations. So this is the top UK grant-making foundations, and just wanted to give you a little insight. Unfortunately, number 9 and 10 have slipped off the bottom when we've put this on here, so we'll cover those and you can get these slides later. But if we start with Wellcome Trust, so Wellcome Trust is a medical research, they fund medical research. And if you look at how much grant they're giving, so they're giving 349 million, their net assets are way, way beyond that. But it's just demonstrating to you how much they're actually giving as far as grants go. Excuse me. And then the next one is the Children's Investment Fund, and that's looking at children's long-term outcomes and investing in those. And then we've got Leverhulme for third. Now Leverhulme were third, I think they were fourth. They've moved up again from the latest. So they are giving grants of 106 million. And they mainly do things like education, research, and fellowships. And they were set up by the Lever brothers. So so when you buy a bar of Dove or Lux, you're supporting part of this foundation. It was set up by the Lever brothers. Comic Relief, we know about Comic Relief, and that you can see there that the grants that they give out are 70 million and their net assets are 116 million. So they're really giving away quite a lot of what they're making as far as grants. Next, we've got Garfield Weston, and some of you might have applied for Garfield Weston before. They're supported by Associated Foods, and they do a wide range of different funds. So they do community, arts, education, environment, and even things like faith and health, wealth and youth. It's a big application form, but they do fund quite a lot. But you can see there that the net assets are well above what the money that they're using in grants. And Sue, I know you've got an opinion about this. I don't know whether you'd want to share about how much people are giving in grants as compared to how much their net assets are.
I do worry. I mean, I do think that some of them should be encouraged to give away more of the money, and certainly the Children's Investment Fund holding £3.8 billion. You wonder why. You know, with Wellcome, presumably, I don't know, maybe it is that the trust owns some of the properties or the buildings that they use, that the factories are. I'm not sure. Whereas you look at Children in Need and Comic Relief, they're holding minimal reserves, which is what they need to fund. If they have they promised you funding for 3 years, make sure they're actually holding that money in reserve for you. Whereas other funders, I'm really not sure why they're holding so much money. And certainly if I was involved in the Charity Commission, I think we'd be looking at that.
Absolutely. And so number 7, we've got BHP, which are the Minerals and Petroleum Company, and they mainly fund things like disaster relief. So things like critical sustainable development. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with their fund as far as the situation that we're in at the minute. The Football Foundation support, as it says on the tin, football, and so their grants that they make are pretty much spent back out into the Football Association compared to the net assets. And apologies, but number 9 is Lempier Kringle, which is an organization that was set up by John Ruffer, and it's mainly supporting Christian charities or foundations, organizations, sorry, within England. And the bottom one is Grace Trust. And again, it was set up by an individual called John Dallow, and he, again, supports more Christian charities and looking at natural disasters. So let's look at what happens within Scotland themselves, and it's because this is probably more interesting to those who are listening today. And we've got, not listed on the top rating, is Cora Foundation. And at the minute, there's a resilience fund, which we talked about. I don't know whether we can bring Malcolm in to just bring a little bit about resilience. Is this the point to talk about it now, or do you want to talk about it another time? Or
Hi, Pam. Thanks for that.
that's okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I mean, probably if we, can pick that up at the end.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. That's fine. So we'll talk about that resilience a little bit at the end. But I mean, Cora Foundation. Go ahead, Sue.
Just to say why Cora Foundation doesn't formally fit into the top foundation, because they manage funds on behalf of other funders and other grant makers. So, for example, some of the 19.48 million is funding from the Scottish Government, or I think they also manage funding for Comic Relief and Garfield Weston. And of course, what we have that's scale is the National Lottery Community Fund, which gave away just over 44 million in Scotland last year.
Yeah, thank you. So that's and they, looking at their own Henry.
Pam.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt there. It's just a wee thing, Sue. I'm not sure if you're breaking up a wee bit. So I don't know whether it's where your microphone is or anything like that. Just to be aware.
Okay. Thank you for that. Sorry, yes. So Cora Foundation, they have their own the Henry Duncan Foundation, or sorry, Henry Duncan Awards, which has just come open. And as Sue mentioned, they handle things like the Comic Relief Fund as well. So obviously all of you are recipients of the Challenge Fund, which is fantastic. As far as the number 27, Robertson Trust come in. And they have actually just closed in February, and they're updating the way that they fund. Volent Charitable Trust is the J.K. Rowling, and she does support things like I think she supports an awful lot of multiple sclerosis and young children's foundations. So it's worth looking into that if you haven't done already. And that is actually handled by the name's just Foundation Scotland. It's come back. Number 67 is Souter Charitable Trust. That's Sir Brian Souter and Lady Elizabeth Souter, and they get their funding from the Stagecoach Foundation, or Stagecoach the Stagecoach Company. And they mainly support Christian, although they do support other organizations as well. SCIAF, Sue mentioned earlier, and they do outside of the UK. Then we've got some other ones, which are Northwood Charity Trust, which is 106. And Northwood mainly support organizations which are within Angus and Dundee, Perth and Kinross. So have a look at that if you're in that area. And then the Ganachie Trust fund comes from AK Bell Whiskey. Their next deadline is actually the 2nd of July. I just looked that up, so it may be worth looking at them for funding as well. And then we've got the Dunard Fund, which is mainly focusing on supporting arts and culture, and they have a big support in classical music. Apologies, you can't see the bottom two there. And the last two that we've got listed are the R&A Foundation, which is golfing scholarships primarily for those who want to take up golf, young people who want to take up golf, and the Maytree Trust, sorry, which is about education and primarily focuses spending their funds in India, South Africa, and Mexico. So if we talk a little bit about applications, one of the most important things is about getting your case for support. And I'm sure you all have got these, but it's really important that you have got a clear and compelling and concise argument which talks about the beneficiaries to your donors. It's the most important reason why you fundraise. And it should clearly explain what you do, the people you do it for, and who and what the service is about. So say, for example, if you're working with young people and you want to make them more confident, self-aware, and team players, and you're going to turn them into better citizens, this is a story that the funders want to hear about, and they want to be able to demonstrate how you're going to have that case for support. And we talked a little bit about, as I said before, about boards and making sure that your trustees have their own cases for support. So when they're out and about talking to people, it's really important that they have their own case for support, so they can use that in applications and when you're talking to other funders. So you've got to learn the language of what's happening. There's been some significant change in the last 5 years about the way that funders want to understand how they work. Sue, were you going to say something there?
No, I was just going to say it's about, yes, it's about keeping up to date. It's not about using certain words that score points, but it's just making sure that you're using language that the funder uses on their website within your application. So you're helping funders. They themselves are usually charities, have their own charitable purposes to meet. So you're helping the funder achieve their aims.
Yeah, absolutely. So the new language, there's lots of changes happening within grants at trusts and foundations at the minute. And you've got some people who are maybe a little bit more traditional, but you've got others who want to talk about, they know what the need is, and they want you to talk about what you already have. They don't want to know about the SIMD stats because all the funders know about that. They meet up and they know what those are. But they want to know about what you've already done, what you've completed, and making sure that you demonstrate that. And as we got there, making sure that the glass is half full rather than half empty, if you were. And so the funder's advice, it's really just talking about giving advice to charities and making sure you understand things like quality wins over quantity. And so it's really knowing that you are going to know your grant maker, that you get to know them better. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be talking about in the next webinar about how you get to know your grant maker, but understanding and staying in conversation with them. It's making sure that you know that people and ideas win grants, and that you're honest beyond necessity, so that you tell them the truth about what you're doing all the time, and making sure that grants are only a part of your income mix. And before we finish towards the end of the webinar, we're going to talk about sustainability anyway. But you'll see a quote there that,
yeah, I see a quote.
Sorry, you see the quote there that's saying that during the application progress and once the grant has been secured, you need to make sure that you're keeping that communication, lines of communications open all the time. And I guess maybe really one of the things as well is talking about, and Sue, I'm not sure whether we want to bring in about the applications and about why applications fail, or whether that's a good point to do it now, or whether you want to talk about that a little bit later.
A slide on that later, Pam.
Okay. Right, that's fine. Okay, back to it, I guess. So yes, and restricted and unrestricted is obviously, it's looking at what the funding that's coming through. You need to be clear about whether that's restricted versus unrestricted. So we put a little bit of a guidelines here about program specific or restricted grants, or for those that are set up for a specific type of activity, different and a budget and objectives. And these can only be used for that specific project. So if, for example, you're looking to fund a project manager and you write to a funder and say, we're going to use it to support the salary for 1 year, that is a restricted grant, which means that it can only be used for that salary. However, you can do something which is unrestricted grants, and this is how the organization sees it's most fit. So say, for example, if you want to use your unrestricted growth to unrestricted funding to grow your organization and its size and scale and services. Yeah.
What
Okay.
we've got increasingly is organisations offering unrestricted funding and offering core funding. So we had Robertson Trust, who for I think 1.5 years, 2 years now, have offered unrestricted core cost funding up to £15,000 a year for 3 years to just cover the core costs of running your organisation. More recently, the Henry Duncan Award grant that's been launched, looking at offering multi-year funding and offer unrestricted funding. It's about saying that we as organisations know what the needs are, and the funders are going to trust us to spend the money in the best possible way, rather than telling us exactly every sort of syllable and every penny how we could spend that. It'll be interesting to see going forward whether more funders do that. If you have time and if you're looking at things to do to fill your time, if you look at what Nick Addington at the William Grant Foundation is suggesting, he's got some really interesting ideas about changing the power relationship between funders and funded organisations. And I think last week, New Philanthropy Capital published some research about power dynamics and what grant makers should be doing about investing power into organisations rather than holding it onto themselves or holding on to it themselves. So we're in an interesting time.
Yeah, so and that's it. We're talking about diversification. So it's actually making sure not putting all your eggs in one basket, and it's making sure that you're looking at a wider context for your organization. So if you are primarily doing things like trusts and foundations, it's worthwhile looking at other things like corporate or individual giving, so that you're not. So if there's for example, if you put all your eggs in the events pot, and you have a big gala dinner coming up next month, you're going to be in trouble now, because the situation that we're in at the minute, you're not able to do that because of the environment and not being able to run events. Sue, was there anything else that you wanted to say about the diversification?
No, I think just everybody's going to be looking at where their money is coming from and how they can maximise income over the next year or two. Oops.
Yeah.
Sorry, I hit the mic.
That's okay.
You can see the very well.
Yeah, and so that's it. It's about and it's also about, as you showed on that next slide, it's about the making a lasting difference. And Sue, I think you're probably best to talk about the sustainability and the lasting difference.
When we're looking at keeping organisations going, we have to remember what our charitable purpose is. And if our charitable purpose is end world poverty, the likelihood is that charity is going to continue for a very long time. But if you're about solving a particular problem and you have solved that, then maybe it's time for your charity to think about winding up or looking at other areas and diversifying and changing its charitable purpose. But in terms of sustainability, what most trustees tend to do is think about how to keep the income holding up. But actually there are 5 pillars to sustainability, and this is where the Lasting Difference Toolkit is worth having a look at. It's saying that income generation and income is only one of 5 equally valuable pillars that you should be really clear about. So what changes might you need to make your services and the way that you're developing and delivering them? Something that we're all doing at the moment as we sit on webinar, and we're becoming much more used to using televised or home-based working. So look at how your service and the delivery of your service is going to evolve. Look at the improvement. What can you do next? Are there other things that you can be doing? What are the opportunities around? Always keeping an eye on what you can do. Innovation. Has somebody got a radical idea? Have some of your service users thought of something that they'd like you to do that is genuinely different? And is this the time to be started looking at? And of course, as we said before, it's really important to measure the impact, the difference that your organisation is making, because that's what keeps us all motivated. That's what keeps us getting up in the morning, motivates your trustees, and it motivates your funders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've missed out a slide here, Sue. And I'm not sure that that's fine. But I think really just the other thing we wanted to cover before we finish off today, we've got a sort of quick 5 minutes or so there, is just talking about when you're writing your applications. You've all done this before anyway, but when you're writing applications, just some quick things to think about. Make sure you read the guidelines, please. Make sure you read the guidelines and the application form, and make a note of any extra information that you might need. Check the deadlines, it's so important, and don't leave it to the last minute. I've had that panic before where you leave it till 11:59 to file something at 12 o'clock and your computer goes dead. So make sure you check the deadline on that. And also to make a rough draft of the application, because it's really vital that you've got a copy of the application when you send it in, because sometimes it disappears and you don't have that, so it's good to have it. And we talked about a little bit about the jargon and abbreviations, making sure that things are clear, and make sure that you answer every question. And then other things that are really important about things like if you're going to put attachments, make sure that you put the right attachments across, that you have included any supplementary information, and that you get somebody external to read. And I know, Sue, you always say to me that you get your husband.
Yeah, he's a sailor. He knows nothing about charities or grant making. If he can understand the application, then anybody can. I mean, the other thing I'd say is just make sure the budget adds up, because some funders, if you're doing an application online, sometimes the budget automatically totals, and that's great, but sometimes it doesn't. So if you've drafted an application, sent it to somebody else, you've added a little bit of volunteer expenses or whatever, do make sure that somebody actually does a final check through before you hit submit. And as Pam said, somebody in our organisation got caught out recently where they hit submit, and the online application that had been stored during the writing process, the minute you hit submit, disappears. You no longer have access to the application. So do make sure you keep a copy. There's nothing more embarrassing than having to phone a funder, a potential funder, and say that you don't have a copy of the application.
Absolutely. And I think just really talking about it, one of the last points for us really is, why do applications fail? There's so many different reasons why applications fail. Number one is probably that organizations don't meet the priorities, that you don't fit the criteria. There's other things like the organization isn't in a geographical area. So I mentioned about Dunard, and they like to put the funding back into Perth, into the the area across that way. So you may just not fit into the geographical area. Also things like it might not fit the prescribed format, or it's poorly written. So there's lots of different reasons. And the one that Sue mentioned about budgets, that budgets don't add up, or maybe the request isn't within the funding range. So do your research beforehand to find out what the funding range is. And one of the other ones, which is things like funders saying, we don't know who this group is. We don't know, are they credible? So do get to know your funder better, so that they know who you are and that they're giving money to an organization that really does exist. Another reason why applications might fail is because the project proposal doesn't seem very urgent, and maybe it won't have the sufficient impact. So that's all about the way that you tell your story, and that's why your case for support is so important. And then things like objectives and the plan of action set out in the application were exceeding the budget and timescales. So I read one application that was of a client that I was working with, and they said they were going to recruit 40 volunteers in 1 year. And when I asked them how many volunteers they currently had, they said 5. So to recruit 40 volunteers in 1 year is a huge upscale, and just wasn't going to meet within the timescale that they had set. Another one is they've just allocated all the money. So the reason why your application failed is they've run out of money, and that can happen. And then one of the last things that we heard is that there isn't enough evidence that the project will become self-sufficient. So remember when we talked earlier about the application process and about having an exit strategy. A lot of funders these days will ask you now about what your exit strategy is, but you need to have that plan as well. Sue, was there anything else that you wanted to add in about why funding applications fail?
No, I think it's mainly the areas you've covered, but I think it's also about just not being frightened of funders. Funders are real people, and do have a conversation. If you're not clear about what they're asking you to do or the question, please speak to them and start to build that relationship. It's going to be even more important as funding gets tighter. We haven't mentioned, I can't believe that 50 minutes in, we haven't mentioned the B word. Brexit is still around. It's still going to have a huge impact on local government and central government funding. It will have an impact on wider funders. We've got coronavirus on top of it. This is not time to sit with your head under the duvet. This is time to get out and be talking to, electronically communicating with your services, getting those stories so that you can build your knowledge and your experience and skills as a fundraiser to better support the organisation and meet its needs going forward.
Absolutely. Sue, was there anything else on sort of a summary before we have questions? Anything else that you'd like to add in?
No, I think I'm good to go with questions.
Okay, Malcolm, over to you.
Okay, well, that's thanks ever so much, Sue and Pam. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. If you can't, do drop a message into the chat. But if you can't, then I'll assume it's all good. So yeah, it's great. We've got a few questions that have come in, so thank you ever so much. I will read them out, and then we'll soon Pam will pick up, and there may be one or two that I may chip in as well. I suppose just before doing that, I thought there was a couple of good simple thinking back to my previous fundraising work, before I moved to Cora Foundation. A couple of the tips that were mentioned there, always, sought to bear in mind, one about if you have the chance to speak to, a prospective or an existing funder, always take the opportunity to do that, because it's about relationships and people. And the other one about, getting an external perspective on an application. And I think, Sue's comment that often it's better if it's somebody who doesn't understand, who doesn't know about your work, because they don't then have any preconceived ideas. So the few questions. First question I've got from Brock at One Parent Family Scotland, saying, I'd be curious, so Sue, this is one for you, potentially. I would be curious from Sue's presentation of what the breakdown is between funds that will support larger versus smaller organisations, in brackets, based on annual income.
Oh, I think that's a tricky one. I don't know offhand. I think what you've got is most funders have no evidence to support this, but I think I'm seeing most funders moving towards funding smaller organisations and assuming that the big organisations have got a magic golden egg somewhere that they can use to fund themselves. I think it's getting tricky, and certainly the trend in the National Lottery Community Fund, where they would only allow one application from an organisation to each of their funds, did mean that charities were having to look carefully at how they delivered services. It seems to me that most funders seem to think that small is better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think more and more funders are looking at supporting local communities, doing local projects. So, you know, a smaller organization is going to maybe win out over who's going to make a bigger impact than a larger organization who maybe doesn't know the community quite so well.
Is that okay, Brock?
Yeah. Nancy from Families Outside is asking, do we have any indication of what the current crisis will mean for the availability of future funding from trusts and bracket especially government?
Do you want me to take that?
Well, I'm just wondering if Sue or Pam, if you've got a view.
Well, it looks to me as if Scottish Government is making as much money available as possible, as is the UK Government. I think the thing to do is keep up to date with what's happening on the SCVO third sector coronavirus hub. But I do wonder where this money is coming from and the impact it's going to have on public funding of public sector funding of charities moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I would agree. You know, from where from my side of things, and I think definitely, like had mentioned earlier about the say one of the funds, this third sector resilience fund, that that's one to obviously look into. And Sue's mentioning the SCVO's website, so to go on there, there's the information, it's on the Cora Foundation homepage. You can get a link straight to it, to that third sector resilience fund. And hopefully you would have seen an email we shared last week from Cora Foundation about the different funds that Scottish Government are making available.
The other thing
I don't know whether, I mean, I suppose in terms of trusts, I mean, there's been quite a lot of activity already with a number of trusts about how they're, what their approach is to, grants, for the next period of time. And, the William Grant Foundation, didn't they? They talked about it the other day. And I'm sure there's others that are, because things have been changing so rapidly, that others will be, considering what their, position should be.
Just one thing, Malcolm, what we saw in 2007, 2008, yeah, sadly I'm old enough to remember that, was that some of the funders decided this was the rainy day that they held reserves for and started spending. So although for most of them their incomes had dropped, they actually spent out more than usual. So this could be the time where grant-making trusts and foundations rally together and start spending those massive reserves that we've seen that some of them are holding.
And I think you also see individuals like Martin Lewis, I know, has just put a big, well, in fact, it's midday, the deadline for applications from 5 to 20,000 for small charities to apply for if you're working within the community. So I think we might see quite a few individuals stepping forward and offering funding over the next few weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there's other people are just popping other questions into the chat, related to this, and, talking about reviewing deadlines, maybe even criteria. I think that hopefully with even one or two of the things that between me, Pam and Sue are saying just now, I think that's, that can be inevitable, and there'll be lots of conversations being having with within individual funders and with funders collectively.
Yeah, we've got an electronic meeting of the Scotland Funders Forum this afternoon. Certainly what most of the funders are talking about is allowing people longer term periods, extending funding, changing submission dates, because if you're not actually delivering services and you've got to report on this next 3-month period, funders are going to be understanding why you're not going to meet the targets or the outcomes that you'd set. Certainly they're talking very openly and very honestly about changes they need to make in their practices and processes, which will hopefully be to the full benefit of funded organisations.
And I think that's where it is so important to stay in touch with the funders that you've got, you know, as far as communication, keeping those lines of communication, don't bury your head in the sand. Everybody's having problems, so speak to your funders and let them know what the issues are.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that ties, you know, all of this hopefully ties in a wee bit to you know, Jackie from Parent Network Scotland kindly asking, you know, would be good to know about existing funding decisions too. And so I think that's the thing, is keeping in contact with any funders that you've got applications in with. That's the way to do it.
Yeah,
absolutely. And certainly all the funders that I know of are still functioning. You know, like Cora, you know, you're all home-based working, but the practices and the processes are still operating as effectively as they did before.
yeah. In fact, one of the organisations I'm working with at the minute has just heard from Robertson yesterday, and so they've got their advisors working, you know, with those who have put applications in for the last round, which finished up the end of February. So they are still working and they're still there. So do contact them.
So we've got a couple more questions at the moment. We're okay for time. It's just about 12. So hopefully everybody's okay, and, you know, great to see so many people still on the meeting. So Charlotte from Positive Help is saying, in terms of reporting and updating our funders, how would you recommend talking about how much the crisis has changed our delivery model?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's really important, and they'll definitely want to know about what you're doing. And I think for an organisation that I'm working for at the minute, it's very much about being able to respond to those and be able to get in touch with your, you know, those people that you're working with, those people who are receiving your support, the way that you know, you're contacting them electronically. So definitely, you know, come up with some good ideas and pass them on to your funders for sure.
I'd be talking to your funders now, so send them and drop them an email saying, obviously coronavirus is affecting our services, this is what we're doing about it, and this is what we plan to do moving forward. And don't wait for the funders to ask you. You tell them, you take control here. Tell them what you're doing, tell them how you're dealing with an unprecedented situation.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would totally endorse that, and hopefully, you know, people on the meeting today, you know, you'll have received, which I think we're all experiencing a higher volume of electronic communication, you know, so hopefully in amongst all of that, you know, one of the messages that, you know, ourselves were sending out from Cora Foundation, you know, was very much about, you know, having a conversation, because we totally understand, you know, what the existing crisis could mean to your work. And, you know, from, you know, once we were funded through, you know, through this, you know, the Early Intervention Adult Learners Fund, you know, we've had a number of organisations email us with an update as to what they are doing, and it's, you know, it's incredible to see how people are adapting, but it's also very valuable for us to, you know, have that information, and, you know, then how we can, you know, share that with the individual policy officer that you have for your funding, and of course, you know, wider Scottish Government. So if any of you want to share that information and with us, and you haven't done so already, then absolutely feel free to do so, and you know, it'd be very, very useful. So the one other question I've got is from Darren at Circle, He's saying, how should we shape applications to match the work we do? Should we be aspirational about the year's work ahead, i.e. target setting?
I notice nobody is rushing to answer that one. I think this is time for you to be guided by the funder and to have that conversation. There's no point in you wasting loads of time putting together an application that funders aren't going to accept. I'd be starting those conversations with your funder now.
Yeah, I would agree. So, I mean, and who knows, people might be changing their criteria, the way that they're working. So it is definitely worth contacting them and saying, this is what we're suggesting. I mean, you know, people like the lottery are really keen to hear what your stories are and to help you shape the project so that it fits what they're looking for, but also what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's great. There's one other quick question. I mean, I know I touched on you know, the comment that you'd made, Sue, about I think you were saying you getting your husband to look at so Brock from One Parent's Family Scotland had just asked you know, a question. Is there, you know, it's interesting, I had a couple of other people ask me this the other day, you know, who, you know, whether there's people within the sector who actually read applications as a service.
Yeah, they're called consultants and they usually charge quite a lot of money.
Yeah, I did think that might be the answer.
Know,
I didn't.
Yeah, there are some funders, I don't know if I should say this, but there are some funders who will look at a draft of your application before you submit the final submission. And I think this is where it's down to you talking to your funder, building a relationship and saying, you know, would you have a look through a draft for me and see what, if you could make any suggestions. Won't all do it. They won't have the capacity to do it. You've got to remember here, with Grant Making Trust foundations, yes, you have lottery for a foundation which has staff teams, Robertson, but other ones have very, very little resources. They want all of their money to be spent on grants. So they make, you know, a clear decision not to employ staff because they want all their money going out into supporting organisations.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Sue, you work for CVS Inverclyde and third sector interfaces do offer some support with applications.
I mean, certainly, I in my paid life, in working with CVS Inverclyde, our PSI does offer that support free of charge to local groups. So I think that would be another argument for contacting your local TSIs. Most, in fact, all of them have a funding officer, a funding lead, and make sure that you're best friends with them as well as getting to know your funders.
Absolutely, and the TSIs offer an awful lot of other training opportunities for you and getting in front of the funders and meeting those funders as well. So definitely worth getting to know the TSI funding people there.
Well, thank you ever so much, everybody, for, you know, your input today. I do hope that you have got things from it. Like said, we'll be sharing the slides and subsequently as well as a recording of the webinar, so it will pick up all that's been shared as well as the question and answers, and hopefully you can see the final slide about the next webinars. So I know that a fair number of you who are here today are booked on for those ones. But if you aren't and you would like to be booked on, then absolutely just drop myself, you know, malcolm@cora.scot, you know, an email, say before lunchtime tomorrow would be ideal. So Friday morning, we've got getting your board on board and engaging funders, and then that's at 11 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock, we've got turning a business strategy into funding plan and being prepared for success. So I know that there's, you know, lots and lots of valuable information, you know, will be in those webinars as well. And like this one has been, those will be recorded as well. So thank you for joining, and Sue and Pam, thank you ever so much for that today. And yeah, Yeah, it's amazing what's happening with the use of digital, isn't it? You know.
It certainly is. Thanks, Malcolm.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.